What's going on, everyone? Today we're here with Joe Montesano, who's a D1 at Harvard School of Dental Medicine. We're going to learn a little bit about his undergraduate journey to dental school and his experience as a D1 during COVID. Thanks for being here today, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, it's an honor to have someone like you here. So, can you please elaborate a little bit on your background? Just where you're from originally, where you went to undergrad, what your major was, and if you took a gap year or not.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I had lived my entire life in New Jersey, actually. And for undergrad, I went to Seton Hall University, which is a small school in New Jersey. Most people only know it for basketball. So, yeah, it's a very small school, not very academically renowned, but it was still a decent education. I double majored in biology and philosophy. So I had some interesting side major that not a lot of people have. And I did some research too in bio and philosophy just while I was there. Um, Let me think. So when I was at Seton Hall, I did a lot of tutoring. I was a quote unquote tutor in residence, which is basically like an RA for a lot of schools, except I was a tutor RA essentially. So I tutored kids a lot during the week, and that actually helped me study for the DAT a whole lot, which I guess will come up later. And let me think. All throughout undergrad, I was assisting as a dental assistant. And I had been doing this actually since senior year of high school, and it's what made me fall in love with dentistry. So I continued doing that during any of my breaks. I would go in and help the dentist that I was working with and continued working with. And both the dentists I worked with ended up writing letters of recommendation for me for our dental school. So it was a very longitudinal relationship, and I still talk to them constantly.
Very cool.
And gap year wise, sorry, I didn't take gap year, but I graduated half a year early. So I graduated a semester early in December, and this was just prior to COVID, so it was a good time to graduate, honestly. But I continued assisting during that gap semester, I guess we could call it, in between starting dental school and the end of graduation.
Wow. So you had a lot of experience. So you knew you wanted to be a dentist very early on, sounds like.
So originally, I actually wanted to be a medical doctor because I figured that was something that I was really interested at the beginning of high school. And then, as part of my high school experience, senior year, my high school was a little bit weird that we could get certified as a as a medical assistant. So I did that, and then I worked as a medical assistant for a little bit, and I didn't really like it very much. But I also had to have an internship, so my high school kind of came in clutch with this. And the only person that would take me in was the local dentist, and that's the dentist that I still worked with all throughout COVID too. So
Very
yeah, I kind of fell into place in it, and that's what made me like dentistry.
So could you also share like the reason that you wanted to get into dentistry in the first place? Like,
Yeah. So for a while, I was convinced that I was still set to do medicine, even though I was really enjoying dentistry.
mhm.
It was really the hands-on experience that made me convinced that I liked dentistry and that it was something that I wanted to pursue. And I think that's true for people who are in dental school and want to choose a specialty. You don't really know what you want to do until you actually do it. So there are a whole lot of people that say they want to do oral maxillofacial surgery. It's really hard to know. Like, you might be very interested in that, but it's hard to know if you actually want to do it for your career for the rest of your life until you actually do it. So dental assisting was my way of seeing, yeah, I actually want to do this. Of course, I wasn't drilling any teeth or doing anything like that, but at least I was in the dental office. The dentists were asking me questions as if I was just one of their clinical fellows or whatever you might call it, and that made things very personable and made me enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, because you were like you were basically it was the next closest thing to being a dentist, right? Dental assistant.
Yeah, more or less.
So I mean, you're at Harvard now, and they have like the highest DAT average out of all the schools out there. So I know you had to do extremely well on the DAT. Could you share a little bit of about how you studied for it and like what your mentality was going through it?
Yeah, so I know when I took the DAT, there were far more resources now. I've heard there's been a whole bunch that have come out that I don't know anything about, unfortunately. But at the time, and I think this still holds true for until today, I really enjoyed the Destroyer books, which I know some people really like, some people don't like, but I think they were so challenging that, yeah, it was really hard to get through the first time, the first or the second time as well.
Mhm.
but they were so challenging that they really prepared me for the DAT. And they made me do as well as I did, which wasn't like the highest score possible, but they helped me do better than I would have done otherwise. And also, they so I hadn't taken a math class in undergrad since freshman year. So it had been 2.5, 3 years since I took a math class. So I also got the math destroyer, which was really helpful. And there were accompanying math videos on YouTube from the people who made the destroyers that I really liked. But in general, I use those. I also look back through some of my undergrad notes, especially for organic chemistry, because I thought I had decent notes. And that helped a lot. It was a lot of self-studying because this is something that I tell anyone who really asked me for my undergrad who's going into pre-dental stuff to try to save money where possible with the DAT, because applications are crazy expensive. So if you can save money, and the DAT itself is crazy expensive, it's like $500 or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, so if you can save money on the resources going into it, to a point, like if you need a class, then take a class. But if you're able to self-study and you think you're okay with that, then I think that's perfectly okay too. It really, the resource you use and the amount of money you need to spend depends on your learning style. Just because it was okay with me doesn't mean it was okay with you. Not doesn't mean it's gonna be okay with the next person.
Right. So I just want to get this clear. So when you went through DAT to store, you went through it like multiple times then.
Yeah. So I, as a background just thing for the ATs, I basically started lightly reviewing the destroyers in like December. And then I took the DAT all the way in June. So I was going through the destroyers very, very slowly the first time because they're really hard, like really, really hard. And there's a ton of questions. So I would like take notes on things that I got wrong, try to understand where I was going wrong. Sometimes I just gave up on a question and figured I'll go back through it again. And I went through it, I think the bio section I went through like 3 times, and then the chemistry sections I went through like 3 or 4 times, and the math section I went through a few times. The math destroyer I went through more, but yeah, I went through it a lot, and that
So,
helped me.
so how'd you feel like on test day? Like I don't know how people usually feel when they're taking the test. Did you feel ready and like you're ready to get it over with, or like did you feel like there were still some concepts that you didn't know, or like you felt like a little like you didn't have all the confidence to take the test?
Yeah, that's the really hard thing about going into the DAT. I've never, I guess this is a common thing to say too, but I was never a particularly good standardized test taker. Like the SAT, I did absolutely horrible on, quite honestly. So there's a certain amount of anxiety that you're always going to have. And I definitely had going into the test that I wasn't exactly confident. And I knew there were some things I could have covered more, like plant biology. I just could not bring myself to learn plant biology for the bio
Oh, yeah.
section. Yeah, exactly. Like we're going to be, anyway,
Yeah.
diatribe aside from my qualms of the DAT. There's some things that you'll know you won't know, and you might get lucky and they might not show up. Plant bio did not show up on my exam, which is fine. So that really made my life easier. But on exam day, when I was taking the test, there were some things I was like, I really don't know. I can take an educated guess and hope for the best. But there were other topics that I was very confident in, and that really made me feel better. And then the PAT kind of ruins that for everyone because
Yeah.
that's really hard to review for. Um, but yeah, it was, yeah, that was good. I should also probably note, I didn't mention this before. For the PAT, I use PAT Booster. I don't know if that's still a thing anymore. It was
Yeah.
kind of new when I was using it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think they're still out there. I think they combine with like DAT Booster. It's like they're
Okay.
yeah, they're the same company, it seems like. So and also just one more thing about your DAT studying. So you took like about almost 6 months, 6, 7 months.
About that much. Oh yeah. I never even finished that story. Sorry. So when so after I took finals in May, I took 3 weeks off from work, and I just studied for that time, like anywhere between 8 to 12 hours a day if I was feeling really crazy. So it was very light review for a while, and then pretty intense review for a couple of weeks, and then I took the test.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's something that I was wondering about is like it seems pretty non-traditional to take it like over that long of a time period, but I was wondering if since you could take your time in the beginning and do like you said light review, like maybe you could absorb the information better and the concepts better. Do you think that that's how it was for you?
That's sort of what my mindset was. I was with my undergrad doesn't have a lot of pre-dental students traditionally, so I was around a lot of pre-medical students who were studying for the MCAT for months and months. So I was sort of under that niche in a way, but I took it a little bit lighter because I knew the DAT was a different exam.
Mhm.
So I think spending more time with less effort for the first initial like bulk of the studying, literally for 5 months, really helped me start to consolidate things in my mind. And then when it came time for the hard, intense studying, then I could work out some of the finer details. So I think, yeah, I think that's a good assessment of it.
Okay, very cool. So, could you please that's my train of thought. Did you show any interest in Harvard beforehand? Did they have pre-dental events that you went to, or did you network with anyone?
So we actually have through Harvard's ASDA, which is the American Student Dental Association for that abbreviation,
Right.
there are a whole bunch of pre-dental events that I've actually been in now, but I didn't know that ASDA existed as an undergrad, and I had never been to any pre-dental or dental event in general, which I didn't. So because there were so few pre-dental students, just no one knew about them at my school, which meant I didn't know about them either.
Yeah.
So now that I'm in dental school, I see how valuable they could have been to me. And quite frankly, I did not expect to get into Harvard. I applied to it because I was like, oh, my scores are decently similar. I can take a shot.
I mean, can anyone expect to get into Harvard?
No, generally not. So that's a very fair point. Yeah, I'm still amazed that I'm here to this day, honestly. But yeah, I think it's a good idea to go to some of these events, though, even if it's not for the school that you're applying to. Like maybe you don't want to go to the HSDM as the ones. That's fine. Just any dental school, just to get some exposure to what it's like. Um, Especially, hopefully, with COVID dying down, it'll be better. But especially during pandemic times, I think that's really valuable.
Okay. So, and what was your interview day like? Can you walk us through like who you spoke to and like what they presented to you, what you got to see?
Yeah, and HSDM or any other interview, anyone in particular?
Yeah, specifically Harvard's. Yeah.
Harvard. Okay, yeah. So it was great when it was back in person. So it actually started the night before. I flew up from New Jersey to Boston, and the way HSDM had it set up was you could stay with the first year student in the dorms that are across the street, and you basically slept on an air mattress in their room, but it was fine because you get to hang out with the D1 for the entire day, that entire day before, so they can show you how things are. My D1 said I look stressed out, so at like 8 o'clock at night, he walked me across the parking lot to go get Chipotle. So that was good. I had my Chipotle and I was happy. And then we also watched the movie until midnight because he also said I was stressed out. So it started off on a strong foot. I was really like, wow, this is not going to go my way at this point. Um, but the interview day was very, very relaxed. Everything was very casual and controversial. Both my interviewers so one of my interviewers was actually the dean that just stepped down after 30 something years. So I figured that was going to be very intense, but he basically knew my application very well, which was nice, and wanted to to clarify certain things on the application. So he asked me to describe a research thing that I did in undergrad and like walk me through your thought process on this and what you were trying to achieve by writing this paper. And the other one actually did the same exact thing. So I had very similar conversations, and they sort of turned into counseling things because the past dean is an oral surgeon. So he was like, yeah, oral surgery is really great. If you want to come here, then this would be a great place to do that. The other one was saying oral surgeons are too trained and they spend too much time in school, never do that. And I think he was a periodontist or a prosthodontist.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to get the two perspectives, but it was very casual. I never felt like I was getting grilled here, which had happened at one of my other interviews, and everyone was so unbelievably nice. So it was a very, very good experience. It was by far my favorite interview.
That's very cool. It seems to become like a consensus that whoever, like whatever school, like someone had the best interview experience at, like they usually tend to pick that school. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So I would assume like the rest of your classmates had the same experience, right? Like very relaxed interviews and like counseling almost.
It depends on who the interviewer is. I think this goes for all schools too, because sometimes it could be a great school and you might have one great, really, really good interview, and then you might have someone who's much tougher in the same experience. Which I don't know. You have to be careful with how much you let one person change your perspective on a school. I know that can be really dangerous, and I know there's some like survivorship bias of like I'm going to the school, so of course it was my favorite interview, but it's yeah, if you notice something's off with more than just one person, then there might actually be something off. And it's maybe not off for everyone. It's just you don't click with that school in a way that might be healthy for you for 4 years of you attending it.
Gotcha. So, and why did you pick Harvard? I'm sure you had like other options, right? So, what do you think made Harvard stand out and unique compared to the other schools out there?
Yeah, so Harvard, I mean, the number one thing with me that was really important at the time was the class size. It's 35 students. So that's so small that you have a built-in community right away. Also, the faculty to student ratio with this class size that small is pretty good. Um, and Boston's great. I've never really been out of New Jersey very much. I've gone on a couple trips throughout the US, but nothing, no long term stay in any other state. So Boston's a great city. It's a young city too, for those who are into that. And I guess the other important thing was the first year we're entirely with the medical school. So at this point in April and almost May, I still have done virtually zero dentistry, which is good for some people who are thinking about doing oral surgery. I don't really know what I'm interested in just yet because I haven't done any actual work in the clinic, but it's really good for people who want to take the exam to specialize in that. And it's also important to recognize that the entire body impacts your teeth just as much as your teeth impact the rest of your body. So you might hear a murmur on the patient that could be dangerous for leading to I don't know, something like endocarditis, where you get an infection from a root canal or something like that, and
Mhm.
then it leads to a heart problem. So yeah, I think it's very beneficial as a dental provider to have a medical background as well.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So I've heard that like at these dental schools that offer like the medical school the first year or two, they ask, "Are you considering specializing?" And like if someone says no, they say, "Oh, maybe you shouldn't like really come to this school because we're not for that. We're for specializing." What did they ask you that at your interview?
Yeah, so I was actually at every single one of my interviews, I was asked, "What are you interested in specializing in?" And the go-to answer that everyone says to say, but I actually believed at the time and still sort of believe, is that I'm interested in general dentistry because, right, they're training you to be a general dentist for 4 years. If you're not into that,
Yeah.
then the chances of you hanging out isn't great. But of my experience with shadowing, I really enjoyed whatever. So at the time, I said I really enjoyed surgeries before I really knew what oral surgery was because I only saw a general dentist do surgeries.
Mhm.
So that was sort of my nice way of saying, surgery seems pretty cool to me, even though it might have changed by now. So that does that make sense? Like you
Yeah,
have
it
to
does.
lead it in the right way.
So yeah, exactly. You told them you're interested in general dentistry, but like you were open to the idea of specializing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Okay. Yeah, that seems to be like the common answer, right? Like, that's what you're talking about, the traditional answer. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about your transition to from being a pre-dent to being a first year now in dental school, and like specifically during COVID?
Yeah, during COVID, it made it tough. So until January, we were completely online. So the vast majority of the class still lived at wherever their home was. So we had people living, calling in from South Korea, and we had people calling in from Paris, all in our class.
Mhm.
I was in New Jersey in my childhood bedroom taking class on Zoom. So this is a very strange experience. Um, and it was rough not being in person with our classmates at first. And I think this is universal for all dental schools who were just entirely online.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if there were all that many of them. HSDM is generally very conservative with how it does things, but it sort of makes sense anyway. So that was very difficult not getting to know people who were in our class and that we were um, doing schoolwork with. So we had to be very intentional about setting up meetings outside of class, like having game nights. We had a whole bunch of those that were a ton of fun. But school itself was manageable at the very least. It was difficult. The transition. undergrad, there isn't a ton of information, but you have to memorize fine details. Dental school and medical school, as they always describe it, which I completely agree with this analogy, is like trying to drink from a fire hose. A lot of people have probably heard
Yeah.
that before. I think that's very accurate, honestly, because there's so much information and you have to remember as much of it as you can, but you can't get all of it, especially on the first pass. So it was a transition, but it wasn't anything too unmanageable. Just COVID made it much harder not having the support of your classmates with physically with you, at least.
So, and now you're hybrid?
Yeah.
Okay.
So right now we actually just switched to officially hybrid this week, and it's been great, honestly.
Awesome. Awesome. And then what about, do you know what the plan is for next year, like in the fall?
Yeah. So we HSDM has a 12-month schedule basically. So our D2 technically starts at the end of July, I think, if I'm running the schedule right.
Oh,
So once July starts, the medical students go off to do their thing. We go to the dental school finally. And it seems, if all goes to plan and nothing goes wrong and variants don't go crazy, that we'll be starting in person, which sounds amazing. Being in class in person again, I never thought I would say this in undergrad, but it sounds fantastic.
yeah,
So we start off with a lot of didactics again because we haven't done any dentistry yet, but just being in person with people, I think, will help at least with the focus a ton. And it seems like we're getting more and more hybrid, focusing more on in-person stuff as we're reaching that point.
okay. Very cool. And so it sounds like it was difficult to get to know your classmates in the beginning. Um, were you able to get to know any at all, or like become friends, or become closer, like form study groups or anything?
Yeah, so it was hard at first because we had to be so intentional with Zooms.
Yeah.
Eventually, some of our classmates made a Discord channel they could just hop onto and talk to people, and that was really nice. I did that a couple of times, but eventually we formed our own groups in class. So I'm friends with a lot of medical students too, because there's 35 of us in a class of 160 of them, or 100, whatever their number is. So it's really good to be interspersed like that. So I don't know dental students as deeply as I do know some medical students, but there are a few that I talk to very frequently. And it was really just about being intentional with setting up Zooms with people, keeping those Zooms with people, showing up to game nights whenever they would be. Um, so it was hard, and some people just didn't do it because they were used to being at home with their family, and it was a transition actually coming into person and moving to Boston. But overall, we're starting to get to know each other more and more, especially as things become more hybrid.
That's really good. So you said like the class size is small. It's like 34, you said? 34
Yeah,
students?
35. Yep.
35. So do you guys eventually, like by the end, like by D4 year, are you guys like a family? Like, is that the
Yeah,
case?
essentially. I mean, it was really nice. Before I committed to HSDM, I was looking at a lot of the pictures of the that last year's D1s, so the current D2s posted on like Facebook and stuff like that. They
Mhm.
were already a family. They would have separate dental school events, and that's something that I still miss. Like there was a cruise that they had back in the day where all the dental schools in the Boston area would go on the cruise, and they would just hang out with other dental students. And yeah, it kind of hurts me a little bit that we didn't get that experience. Hopefully, we'll still get that once COVID clears up.
I'm sure
Yeah,
you.
they were definitely a family. I think COVID just made it hard for us, and it really made us dispersed into medical school because, well, we never had anything in person with our dental students.
Right.
It's starting to get a little bit better now that we're in person every couple of weeks. Where it's usually every other week. We have dental clinic actually in the morning, where we can actually assist some upperclassmen, which is fun. And then we just see dental students, so that's always a good time. But
Very cool.
yeah.
And so I understand that you said this year it was just hard making that transition, especially during COVID. How do you think your D1 year compares to like previous D1 years that like were not during COVID? Do you think it was just as difficult, or was it easier because you were able to be at home and like watch maybe recorded lectures or something?
Yeah, so our curriculum's a little bit weird that recording the lectures doesn't doesn't fly because we do case-based learning most. So if you had a miss, they would be recorded. But a lot of the learning actually happened in small breakout rooms in Zoom where you just worked on things with your fellow classmates, which was a great experience. But you didn't have an option. You had to be on Zoom or learning would be difficult. Um, Overall, I think it would have been easier if we were in person. I think it would have been more chill, to say the least,
Mhm.
because when you're everyone kind of comes in with the mindset of they did an undergrad where they were trying to be the best that they could be, and they just keep that mindset if you're separated as you are over Zoom, where you're literally living in distant parts of the country. You don't really see anyone, you don't really talk to them as much as you would if you were in person. And I think that's something that we missed out on this year, and everyone kind of kept that mindset. It didn't start wearing off until recently,
Mhm.
because we are pass fail.
Right.
So you don't have to do as well, and you have no one to compete against besides whatever score you want to get. And that actually took me a while to lose too, because I was still stuck in that mindset, and
Yeah.
that really stresses you out. But if it wasn't for that mindset, I think it probably would have been more or less the same, bar the not being in person with our classmates, because that's something that we really missed.
Wait, that's funny. You didn't mention pass fail as like one of the reasons you chose Harvard, right?
I forgot that.
Oh,
It
okay.
is actually helpful. Yeah,
Yeah, I
it
was just like,
is.
that's like a first reason for me to like pick a school, right? Like it seems like there's so much stress out of it, and the environment just becomes like a lot more collaborative, right?
Yeah, that is definitely absolutely accurate. We share note. We have a Slack that literally is like study material sharing, that people post study guides that are hundreds of pages long.
Mhm.
It's very impressive how collaborative it is, and it's really nice because if you ever need help with anything, you can always ask someone else. So it's great. But yeah, I should have included that in my reasonings. Yeah, it's one of those things you forget about once you have it because it's so
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
But yeah, that's not to say we don't study though, because we still study a ton. There's still so much information, but yeah, it's
fair.
good to have that stress off.
So something that I was wondering was, how is it? How are the clubs at the Harvard's down school? Like, are there any clubs that are online, or do you have to wait to go back in person?
So right now, because we're with the medical school, a lot of dental students are in medical school clubs as well.
Okay.
So everything has been mostly transitioned to online. So there's a dental aesthetics club that I somewhat go to whenever I don't have class at the time that they have it. And it's basically been case presentations just through Zoom. So they share the screen, they show the health record of that patient, they can show x-rays on it. Of course, it doesn't come over all that great over Zoom unless they click the optimize your video button or whatever it is.
Mhm.
But everything, it seems like clubs have transitioned very well over to Zoom. And in a way, sometimes they're better over Zoom. I would say this is one of the things that improves over Zoom, because you don't have to leave where you are to go to them
Yeah.
and then have an hour meeting and then be like, well, now what do I do? So that was nice, at least.
Very cool. All right, that'll be it for this interview, everybody. Joe, thank you so much for your time again. If our viewers have any additional questions for you, is it possible they can reach out to you through email or social media?
Yeah, if you can find me, I can give you whatever you need. But yeah, more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd love to answer questions.
Okay, awesome. And I'll include all those details in the description of this video. Everyone out there, if you haven't already, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when we upload new content, hit the notification bell. If you have any questions for us at FutureDDS, you can always DM us on Instagram at _FutureDDS, and we'll try to reply as soon as possible. And until next time, we'll see you all then.